Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. We're going to be talking about how to make college possible, how to help folks through what can be a really challenging path to get to completion. To do that, I'm joined today by Dr. Siva Kumari, who is the CEO of College Possible. Siva, welcome to Trending in Education.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks for this opportunity.
It's great to have you. We are aware of some of the problems that are out there, but I think what you're doing, there's some differences to your model that I think we want to flesh out a little more for our listeners. Before we get there, we always start by getting to know you a little bit better. Can you catch us up on your origin story, how you got to this point in your career?
Yeah, I was born in India, where I did my bachelor's. And then I wanted to go and start my master's in India, but my father felt more education was not necessary for a girl.
Mhm.
So, in what was to be the only time ever, I kind of overruled my father's decisions, which I never ever did before that or never ever did after that. But I decided to go and apply for master's on my own. And I think looking back now, it was the start of a dominating theme in my life that education is really important universally for young people
Mm.
everywhere. And then soon after that, I had an arranged marriage and I joined my husband in Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
And that's where I restarted my master's because none of the credits from India were accepted by University of Cincinnati.
Go Bearcats.
Yes. So I did that. And then, I share this background particularly because I was the first female in our extended family to get a bachelor's and all of the degrees after. But I remember the dread of applying for that master's against my parents' wishes.
Mm.
And I think the students that we work with at College Possible, I consider them brave souls because many of them are first-gen students.
Yeah.
And we are really glad to serve them on this tough and life-changing process
Mm.
of getting to and through college
Yeah.
in this first world, right?
Mhm.
Professionally speaking, a bit about how I meandered and got here is I worked with Rice University in Houston, Texas, which is very close to our home here.
Go Owls. Is that right?
Owls,
Yeah.
yes,
Right.
the
I'm,
Rice
I'm trying to
Owls.
stay on top. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well done. So I worked there for about 15 years in various positions. I love that university, still love that university. Worked there as associate dean, and then I left there as an associate provost for K-12 initiatives because the president then, President Lebron, had this great vision about bringing the university's intellectual capital to support the students, in underserved areas to break that
Yeah.
town, to make the town-gown connection. So I was very enamored with that vision and was very privileged to work with people to, fulfill that vision. So it was straddling that resources in higher ed versus what's happening in K-12. And that's where I got to know a lot about how the public education really works in the
Yeah.
US,
Mhm.
including how leaders function and creating some programs to enable better leadership in that area,
Mm.
etc.
Mm.
And then following that, I mean, it's through that work and through writing competitive grants that I came to know about the IB and I got to work with them a bit. And then I joined them, in various global roles
The
and ended
International
up as
Baccalaureate.
the International Baccalaureate, which
Yeah.
some people think is a language learning program, but those who know
Mm.
know that it is a very comprehensive, holistic, and humanistic program that thinks about, how students can get educated to make impact on the world,
Mm.
and a very rigorous program accepted the world over.
Yeah.
So in that role as a director general, I was one of the first female and the seventh director general for the IB. Through my work there, which was my motivation in joining the IB, I got to learn a lot about systems around the world and talk to ministers of education around the world
Mhm.
on how diverse educational systems think about their system of education and
Mhm.
their aims of education.
And that must have been an interesting perspective for you coming out of India originally, but then sounds like you really got to know Houston with a level of depth that maybe most folks will never get to. And then to take that to
Yeah.
IB and start to explore more like, okay, thinking more globally, how might this work? I could see how the perspective that through line might provide you would be kind of unique.
Yeah, that was very exciting. And I think at some point I need to stop and reflect on what that learning was, but
Mm.
who has time, right? The interesting thing for me is also how different educational ministers saw the value of IB and fit it into their systems,
Mm,
for different purposes. In some cases, to bring up teacher quality, in some cases, to make the country's agenda of being more global, like in the case of
yeah.
Japan, etc. So I think, just seeing how a system, which is, in our view, pretty, most of us experience a pretty locked down thing.
Yeah.
How does an external thing that does maybe a sliver of a thing really well
Yeah.
get incorporated? And I think I consistently think of that, from a system level.
Yeah.
How does that work for us at College Possible?
That's really interesting because systems thinking is a larger trend that, I guess because it's sort of subtle, it's almost
Yeah,
operating behind the scenes. But I am
yeah,
talking to more people who are surfacing it as like the way to kind of understand things nowadays. And you
yeah,
almost need to engage across systems to your point, where like,
yeah,
when you in a role with international baccalaureate, you're going to be engaging with different countries who have completely different educational systems. And it's almost like without seeing the differences, you can't, it's like the whole fish and water problem, right? If you
yeah,
only exist within one system, it's harder to get that broader perspective.
yeah, yeah. So I took a brief hiatus after that because it was post COVID and I
Yeah.
took the IB through COVID, which was quite difficult,
Right.
and then joined College Possible.
Yeah.
I think what attracted me to the role is one, it was a completely different sector than the places I'd been in.
Yeah.
But it actually goes back to both those things. My own life of saying, young women need educational opportunities. And in the case of the US, young men too, especially from these lower income families,
Yeah.
because India has done a really good job of social, economic mobility through education.
Yeah.
It's got its own problems, but nonetheless, there is a path. And you see a lot of people in the US who come from that, including me, who come from that educational system.
Yep.
So I think that was one bullet point. And then the second was just to focus on these underserved students,
Hmm.
which for me was kind of like a calcified problem in a way. I mean, I'd left for about 15 years to go, see the world
Yeah.
of education and come back and to see those intractable problems still present in
Right.
the US system, and
Hmm.
particularly the inequity of the lowest socioeconomic class and their plight in our US educational system
Right.
seem to be remain the same. Going away gave me fresh energy to come back
Right.
to that issue. And I found the track record of College Possible to be quite attractive,
Hmm.
and seeing what this organization has been doing for 22 years. So I thought, why not?
Yeah.
Let's kind of,
Absolutely. And yeah, maybe moving on to the story of College Possible then. So, 22 years seems like a lifetime depending on who you're talking to. And there's been a lot of change through that period. And then, in particular, the problem space you're talking about, which is building that social mobility, economic mobility into our educational systems, into our systems. But then how
yeah.
can education drive that? How has College Possible been addressing this problem? How do they really identify the problem space?
Yeah, our founder, Jim McCorkle, did a fantastic job in laying the foundation for this organization 22 years ago, actually 23 years ago. So essentially, we started off with saying we really want to help students who qualify for free and reduced lunch. And we want to help students in the 2.0 to 3.0 grade point average.
Hmm.
There are a lot of people in our sector, each occupies a different space. And I'm
Yep.
particularly enamored by this space. So his goal was to work with juniors and seniors and create a program that was very people oriented, but data driven.
Hmm.
And, there was a lot of success. And, he and others were encouraged to kind of like what happens to these students in college, why
Right.
leave them? So follow them through. And that's how we became College Possible. So we went from a high school program to also college program.
Hmm.
And that is fascinating to me, like this long relationship with a student.
Yeah.
And I would venture to say that it's very unlikely that that student has that kind of a relationship anywhere else in their life where this
Right.
external organization kind
Hmm.
of works it.
In fact, one of
Um,
the challenges you hear a lot about folks who have trouble with college is that they had adjusted to whatever they had done to get through high school, and then
Yeah.
they're forced into an entirely different system, a different environment again. And for some folks, it's great, but for others, and then especially if you add to that the complexity of first gen,
Yeah.
first person in your family going to college, and some of the other systemic problems we might have in our society and in our educational system, it makes sense that you kind of create that through line, that connectivity with someone who's rising right through high school, all the way through college. I hadn't really thought about that. There aren't that many models out there that actually do help with that full span, including the transition.
Yeah. What you identified is exactly right, right? So it takes a lot of ignition and energy for the student just to complete that process of thinking of college if they haven't thought about before.
Right,
If the family is not encouraging them to do that, to still have the drive to
right.
consider what is new and leaving, tuning
Yeah,
out all of the voices that are saying this is not for us, right? We don't
right.
do this,
It's like
whatever.
the imposter syndrome, but from your family at times,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then, so getting them into college, then we also have what's called the summer program, because what we found is in this population, the students drop out during that summer because of various circumstances. They may be helping out with the family, they may
sure.
be doing a job, whatever. So we have to counter that process to say, no, you got admitted, now let's go to college.
Right.
And in the college, as you identified, Mike, all of those issues of belonging,
Yes,
what our original mission was is to really just help the student connect to the different resources
sure.
that the best of us are not educated in, right? Like it's a colleges do an orientation and all of that, but that repeat messages and just in time messages, I think, are needed a lot. So I think that's where we keep, and we know the drop off, right? Like the drop off between first and second year
Yep.
is high. The drop off between second and third year is high. So
Right.
that persistence loop that we keep an eye on, or it's not a loop, it's a linear.
Yeah.
That it's really, I think, important as well.
Right.
So I think that's where I see that we do a really good job of just keeping that student involved and moving through college, right?
Yeah. What does the model actually look like? I saw kind of like a near peer mentoring component to the model. Can you talk about how almost like connecting to the whole student, the whole person? It does
Yeah,
feel like a lot of the scaffolding here is less cognitive. It's more almost like a combination of like bureaucratic. We'll talk about FAFSA in a bit, but
yeah,
like in addition to just bureaucratic, it's more just someone who knows me, who believes in me, who's kind of a sounding board and a guide. And I was curious about the fact that you did do some kind of near pairing,
yeah.
which was an interesting aspect to the model.
Yeah, I think that part of it, the near peer model that we work with, where we bring AmeriCorps students, and AmeriCorps, which I have come to learn about, is like Peace Corps for domestic purposes. So we work with young people, who are unbelievable humanitarians who are giving up a year of their life to be in service. I think that's a great activity and a great time for growth for these
Yeah.
young people, but also they're giving right through that work. So we pair them up with juniors and seniors in high school, and that helps a lot because they're very close to that experience of going through this mind-boggling array of
Yeah.
activities.
Hmm.
So that helps a lot. And they also have the energy and the pure understanding of what that felt like, right?
Right.
Among everything you have to do in high school, here's another thing, or you also
Hmm.
have to do.
Hmm.
And I think that's really good. I mean, I was reading some stats from the American School Counselor Association about how woeful, some systems are in supporting these underrepresented students or students from low income backgrounds.
Yeah.
They were saying that a ratio of about 278 to 1 is a really good ratio for counselor and student.
Wow.
And in some of the worst places, it's 600 to 1, where
Wow.
the
Okay.
system is not supporting.
Yeah.
For us in the coach area, we try to keep it at about 60 to 1.
Hmm.
So you can imagine the attention.
Yeah.
Uh, so the coach's role, there are a lot of mechanical things, right? Like get your essay and help with the essay, the deadlines,
Yeah.
how do you pick a college, what is best fit, what is financial aid. So there are a lot of these educating about college
Yeah.
that is in the curriculum
Sure.
or the program.
Hmm.
But the other part of it is really getting to know the student,
Hmm.
and to the extent that student allows that bridge to happen
Right.
is to really partner with them, and
Yeah.
I think if you ask our students, they'll say that, both of those were equally important. Getting the information, having someone with you while completing what we all know now is the dreaded FAFSA.
Yeah.
But it was what it was before that. And then, the understanding of what colleges are in the region,
Yeah.
how to succeed in them.
Hmm.
That's quite important. And in the college space too, we have two different kinds of models. We have the staff who, are on our staff, and we also have the AmeriCorps coach model where
Yep.
the student has to forms a relationship. And in that area, we're really connecting the student, reconnecting them to the resources, appropriate resources. But
Yeah.
the whole model is on, yeah, we're extremely data driven and we know what are those informational things, but it is about that personal connection
Yeah.
with the student.
Makes sense even in the name, college possible. I imagine if you're kind of at that threshold where you're about to leave high school and you're not really sure
Yep.
what's next, if you can actually see someone and get to know someone who's just on the other side of that passage, you
Yeah.
can start to, even if you don't follow their exact path, you believe that a path like that is there for me. And it's
Yeah.
it's almost like counters the other risk that folks get involved with the wrong peers, maybe a couple years down the road, and they actually
Yeah.
go on a less positive path. Also,
Yeah.
the call to service of AmeriCorps, it's a nice
Yeah.
reminder that, some of that external humanitarian efforts, they can also be focused internally and really help folks
Exactly.
in need, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we have eight sites around the nation. So there's a lot of good experimentation. And I know one of our sites, maybe more, but the one I know about is also piloting a program where we connect all of the college boys students on that campus.
Yeah.
And in this particular site, there are about like 500 students on with that we, provide to this college.
Mhm.
So it's connecting all of them because there's a natural community there, all of these students who've gone through college possible.
Yeah.
And that gives them a really nice, networking space, a comfort space, which we
Yeah.
all need when we first go to college.
Mhm.
As you said, you're testing out what are the different groups of people to hang out with.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really good that, they might be a ready-made college possible community on that campus that can guide them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then at the same time, college is facing some challenges. Higher ed is facing some real challenges. There was talk even pre-COVID, pre-AI revolution. There was talk of the demographic cliff that we're now much closer to in the US, where there's just fewer traditional college aged students heading to the next phase. I think for the students themselves, perhaps there's a little upside in that, we can identify them better and perhaps give them more support if it is truly a numbers game, and some of the ratios you were putting out there maybe do speak to that.
Yeah.
But, trust of higher ed and readiness of higher ed to kind of respond to a rapidly changing world of work, even your roots, back at Rice, it's a trickier time now to be leading a higher ed institution than perhaps ever. I'd love to get a little bit of your perspective on where we are today and then how you're thinking about it, leading college possible.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of preponderance in the higher ed critique space that focuses on the top elite schools. What I'm getting to know more and quite fascinated by is that there are enough choices for students coming from low income backgrounds to find those universities who are really thoughtful about how to support Pell students to get them to completion,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
It is staggering to think that we have, this SCMC, right? Some college, no credential.
Yeah.
There's like 40.4 million students. That is mind boggling to me.
Yeah.
And worse yet, that these students have paid, through for all of those credits.
Or they owe for those credits. Yeah.
Yeah. And therefore they might be debt ridden. And that is the worst possible scenario. So for us, I think is finding those colleges that are going to support Pell Grant recipients, etc., and getting them through to completion is what we focus on. Of course, our own service focuses on that too.
Right.
But, reflecting that staggering number that I just talked about, the
Right.
40.4 million, we do have students who drop off. So I think it's a constant effort. We're so tenacious about that. Like even if the student dropped off, our staff just, you know, keeps reaching out to them saying, when are you going to come back, etc. But all of these, I think it's that notion of communicating you are welcome, you belong, we care about your success
Yeah.
is finding universities and maybe eventually for us to have an advocacy around that to say this is important work. And it's beneficial for the university as well. I mean, it's income for the university. And so I think it's really for us important to kind of keep track of those universities rather than everything else. To the other point that you've talked about, we're adjusting to the reality that many of our students want to go to the community college route as well.
Hmm.
And I think we want to focus on those community colleges that, get their students to complete that associate degree as
Yeah.
opposed to those who have stats otherwise, right?
Hmm.
And also to communicate to the student that, transferring to a college is possible. And we're trying to work with those community colleges that have a clear transfer pathway to a bachelor's.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think it's a very troubling time in US higher education for very many reasons,
Right.
right? So it's hard to operate universities. The divide in the country causes a lot more consternation for everyone involved.
Right.
You can understand all of the sides, but it's just kind of like a very combustive environment right now.
Yeah.
And then there's, the small colleges are failing, small liberal arts colleges are failing at
Yeah.
a rate.
Hmm.
And many of them are going to be in continued fragile circumstances.
Hmm.
So I think it's really interesting time for the US higher education to really grapple with some of these issues. And they're so diverse depending on where the university sits in the ecosystem.
Right.
But we're just focused on how do we connect the student to resources and get them out of college,
Yeah.
right?
And also, and community colleges is an interesting
Yeah.
point, as well. An interesting, again, perhaps a counterpoint to the focus on the top 20, top 50, R1, highly
Yeah.
selective universities, which have a completely different set of circumstances. And it's great, College Possible. I'm sure you'd love to connect folks to those limited seats. But
Yeah.
the bigger point, and, maybe gets to some of the notions around Pell and FAFSA and some of these other things is there actually are benefits out there. There are ways that people can get help, but they don't know how to get the help. And that's where it does feel like, especially the AmeriCorps, like a call to service to actually help our own people
Yeah.
navigate this very complex landscape. I think that's pretty inspiring.
Yeah. I think Frank Rooney wrote this book about Where I Went to College is Not Who I Am, I think is the title. We're living in a world's first economy. So there's a place for students who complete college at different colleges, right? Like not everyone can, the very nature of IB is exclusion, right? Versus
Right.
inclusion.
Mm.
So not everyone has to go to the top rated college to have a really good life and have
Yeah.
generational wealth change, etc.
Hmm.
So I think we really need to focus on what is best for our students and how do we get them. But that getting that college degree is still important according to all research about income earning over life, right?
Yeah.
So the aggregated income earning potential over life is still determined by a college degree.
Right.
Hopefully that will change as the gig economy expands and other things. I'm personally quite agnostic about going to a trade school versus, vocational. And community colleges now have healthcare options
For sure. Yeah.
and other options. So to go into industries that are thriving and will always thrive. So I think there's lots of opportunities and we should just keep our eye on the ball at getting that student out of the system, successfully out of whatever system they want to be in at the moment.
Yeah. And successfully out of the system when it comes to higher ed, in most cases means landing a job on the other side or having a career pathway downstream.
Yeah.
And that's where we have seen a lot of disruption in the world of work, probably as the leading edge of technology innovation and knowledge work. Like it's definitely been
Yeah.
hit squarely by the AI revolution that we're in the middle of. There's been a lot of change downstream from higher ed. And then higher ed, still facing its own challenges, needs to kind of grok the AI wave and figure out how to ride it and how to kind of help navigate it. I imagine there's both upside and risk for your population, the folks you're trying to help and even your organization. But how are you thinking about some of the AI wave that has been hitting since ChatGPT hit the scene about a year and a half ago?
I'm a big fan of, I mean, my research background is instructional technology. So I'm an early adopter. While I was at Rice, I worked on the first K-12 server,
Nice.
way back when,
Nice.
Netscape, all of that craziness, right? So before WYSIWYG editors for the web and HTML 1.0 and all of that. So I'm just like, I'm always on the lookout for what's the next. And I do believe AI is a phenomenon not to be ignored. For us, we are quite excited. So we just recently received a grant from Salesforce as one of 6 organizations internationally to be a part of what they call an accelerator grant. What I liked about the grant is, we got some cash, but they gave us access to their staff who volunteered for this project. So we got to work with the best of the best, and they were super helpful. So we ideated on how, College Possible can responsibly use both generative and predictive AI through some of their products. And so we're busily adopting that. We're
Yeah.
building away, already, and we're creating modules. So I'm quite excited about that.
Yeah.
What for me is the excitement is twofold. One is we have a ton of content that we educate the incoming AmeriCorps member on every year.
Yeah.
But you can imagine it is hard for a person coming in, being inundated with
Yeah.
all this
It's a fire
content. And
hose.
then
Yeah.
when they leave, and then next year again, we have to
Yep.
start. So that knowledge base can be, we can do that with predictive and generative
Yeah.
AI, is to say, we know these are commonly asked questions. Like a huge percentage of the questions will be the same,
Yep.
you know, on the mechanical side of things, like, you need to write an essay.
Yep.
How can we automate the answer that the coach needs to give,
Right.
or have a bot give the answer to the student on
Hmm.
these routine questions?
Hmm.
And how can we free up the time of the human supporting, in this case, the coach supporting the student, to be more available in a humanistic way? So
Yeah.
leave the AI to do what it can do well. And
Hmm.
of course, we'll keep all the guardrails to ensure we're going to train it on our own content.
No
No,
hallucinations, no
yeah,
misinformation. Everything's explainable. I understand. So
yeah.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think we're quite excited. The second aspect of it, that's from a data collection point of view, is I want to see how we can put in place systems, feedback loops, so that the student can quickly put like, okay, this was helpful, this was
Hmm.
not, which we're all now used to. And these students, more than most, are used to those kind of feedback
Yeah.
loops and quick answers. They don't mind bots. They're
Right.
they're much more sophisticated
Hmm.
than
They grew
the
up with
generation.
Alexa and
Yeah.
Siri and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're also able to discern what is human created versus what is non-human created. So they're very savvy about that, I
Right.
think.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's very exciting. And we're not dipping our toes where the toes are completely.
You might be shin deep at least. You're on your
Yeah.
way in. But yeah, and then it's important, I think, because on the other side, like I mentioned before, industry, there's no debate within industry as to whether you're going to use this stuff or not. So, like, if ultimately a successful college career results in a job, you want to be operating similarly to how you're going to be operating as a professional, and to act as though they're two different universes, I think
Yeah.
is certainly dangerous, especially in this time that we're living in. Been an amazing conversation. I'd also love to hear maybe some advice or some thoughts for folks who are maybe earlier in their career. You've worn some really interesting hats and you successfully navigated a really wonderful career. Any advice, any suggestions for folks out there if they're trying to figure out how to get from point A to point next?
Yeah. I think the big thing about my career is I didn't have a next point, right? Like I wasn't doing a job to say, I know I want this job
Mhm.
next. But what I think, because I was an inherently curious person, and essentially never satiated with just what I was given to do. I would always seek opportunities to do more, even though it was never in my job description. I don't think I ever looked at my job description to say, what should I be doing?
Mhm.
You know, So I think that's just being open to experiences, I think, and taking small risks. And, being very thankful to the people around you who give those opportunities, because I can think of the number of people who trusted me,
Yeah.
even when at some point I was suggesting ideas that were quite out of the wheelhouse of the place I was in,
Yeah.
and taking that risk. It's actually kind of some of the learner profile characteristics of an IB, a risk taker, curiosity, and
Yeah.
all of
Mm.
um, I think that's what's important, and being focused in on being the best you can be at what you're doing and always testing the outer peripheries. I think one other thing is also to just get out of the system you're in, like a periscope, and look what's around
Mhm.
and what's attractive and keeping the eye on what's coming about, right?
Mhm.
So you're prepped for that next level, I think.
Mhm.
I think that's all I can suggest. I never had this is what I want to be. It's always
Yeah.
been tapping on the shoulder to say, hey, think of this.
Yeah. That's
So I had
amazing.
what's
Yeah.
considered in psychological terms a positive blind spot.
That's good. I like it. Yeah. I think there's a lot for folks to chew on there. I'm talking to Dr. Siva Kumari, who is the CEO of College Possible. It's been a wonderful conversation. Siva, thanks very much for joining. As folks head off to the rest of their lives, you just gave them some advice. Any takeaways, any concluding thoughts as we wrap things up?
Yeah, I think just, support people like us who are providing this extraordinary service. It's mind boggling to me how much the organization works hard to create the revenue for what is a system failure,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
So we're making up we're creating a scaffolding or a netting to support where there is no support, there's no funding. So essentially you're working
Yeah.
really hard to make this happen. And I think that dedication is amazing. And that's why I wanted to be here. So just
Yeah.
for folks to be aware that there is a whole sector doing this work.
Yeah. The social safety net is knitted
Yes,
together through organizations like yours, AmeriCorps. And also
yeah.
it's great to see how you're connecting with others to kind of really provide those types of supports. Amazing conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on today's show.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks a lot.
And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. If you did, please subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things. We'll be back again soon. This is Trending in Education.